The moment my father announced that my golden boy brother Derek would inherit $36 million from Grandpa's estate, while I got nothing, I felt my world collapse. 28 years of being the forgotten son, the disappointment, the one who never measured up to Derek's achievements. But as I sat in that mahogany-paneled law office watching my family celebrate Derek's windfall, I had no idea that within the next hour, a single sealed envelope would turn their celebration into absolute terror and change everything I thought I knew about my grandfather's true feelings toward me. I should have known better than to get my hopes up. After all, this was just another chapter in the lifelong story of Derek getting everything while I got the scraps. But sitting in that plush leather chair in the downtown law offices of Patterson, Hayes and Associates on that gray October morning, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe Grandpa had seen something in me that the rest of my family never did. The office smelled like old books and expensive cologne. Oil paintings of stern-faced judges lined the walls, and the October rain pelted against floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bustling streets below. Mr. Patterson, a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, sat behind a desk that probably cost more than I made in 6 months working construction. Derek arrived 15 minutes late as usual, striding in, wearing a $3,000 suit and flashing that $1 million smile that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. At 30, he was everything my parents had always wanted in a son. Harvard MBA six-figure job at a prestigious investment firm, the kind of guy who closed deals over golf games and drove a BMW that he replaced every 2 years. My father Robert beamed when Derek walked in, standing up to shake his hand like they were business partners, rather than father and son. Dad was 58, still handsome in that silver fox way that made him successful in real estate. He wore his authority like a tailored jacket, never letting anyone forget that he'd built a multi-million-dollar property empire from nothing. My mother Patricia barely glanced at me when she air-kissed Derek's cheek. At 55, she was still the socialite beauty who'd charmed her way into Houston's elite circles 30 years ago. Her jewelry probably cost more than most people's cars, and she had that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. I sat there in my best khakis and button-down shirt, the same outfit I'd worn to every family function for the past 5 years. The contrast was obvious and painful. While Derek discussed his latest investment victories with Dad, I remained silent, remembering how different things had been growing up. Derek got piano lessons while I got hand-me-down clothes. Derek got a brand new car for his 16th birthday while I learned to fix engines in Grandpa's garage. When Derek graduated Harvard, the family threw a party for 200 people. When I finished my associate degree in construction management from the local community college, Dad handed me a beer and said, "Well, at least you finished something." The only person who ever believed in me was Grandpa. While Dad groomed Derek to take over the family real estate business, Grandpa taught me how to build things with my hands. He showed me that there was honor in honest work, that creating something solid and lasting was just as valuable as shuffling papers in an office. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and opened the thick folder containing Grandpa's will. "Before we begin, I want to express my condolences again. Your grandfather was a remarkable man who spoke of his family often. The first part of the will contained standard charitable bequests. $50,000 to the local children's hospital, $25,000 to his church, smaller amounts to various causes Grandpa had supported over the years. Nothing surprising there. Then Patterson reached the main event. His voice took on that formal tone lawyers use when they're delivering life-changing news. To my grandson Derek Robert, I leave the family estate in Connecticut, including all furnishings and grounds valued at approximately $8 million. Derek straightened in his chair, trying to look humble but failing to hide his excitement. Mom reached over and squeezed his hand. I also leave Derek the vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, including the boat and all associated equipment valued at approximately $4 million. Dad actually laughed with pleasure, slapping Derek on the back. "That's my boy." Patterson continued, "The stock portfolio managed by Fitzgerald and Associates, currently valued at $12 million, also goes to Derek." Derek's smile grew wider. Mom was practically glowing with pride. Additionally, Derek receives the classic car collection, housed in the Connecticut garage, appraised at $8 million, and liquid assets totaling $16 million. I did the math in my head. $36 million. Derek was inheriting $36 million. Patterson looked at me with what might have been sympathy. "To my grandson, Reginald James, I leave my workshop tools equipment and the contents of my garage workspace to be used in his construction endeavors." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. My workshop inheritance was probably worth $2,000, maybe $3,000, if you counted the vintage drill press that barely worked. Dad's reaction cut deeper than the inheritance disparity. He actually chuckled, shaking his head like he'd heard a mildly amusing joke. "Well, Reginald, at least you got something useful for your construction work. Your grandfather always did understand people's limitations." Mom didn't even look at me. She was too busy congratulating Derek, already planning how they'd redecorate the Connecticut house for family gatherings. Derek, to his credit, tried to look sympathetic. "Hey man, I'm sorry, I know you were hoping for more." But his eyes were bright with greed, and I could practically see him calculating investment returns in his head. "Don't worry about it." I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. Grandpa knew what he was doing. The family began discussing celebration plans. Derek wanted to drive up to Connecticut that weekend to see the house. Dad suggested they have dinner at the country club to toast Derek's good fortune. Mom was already on her phone, probably texting her friends about Derek's windfall. I felt invisible, which was nothing new. This was just another reminder that in my family, I was the spare part, the backup plan that was never needed. While they talked about Derek's brilliant future managing his inheritance, I thought about going back to my one-bedroom apartment and my job-framing houses in the Houston heat. Patterson began gathering papers, clearly preparing to wrap up the meeting. That's when he paused his hand halfway to a manila folder I hadn't noticed before. "Actually," he said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty, "there's one more item." The room fell quiet. Derek looked confused. Dad frowned, and Mom finally looked away from her phone. Patterson pulled out an old yellowed envelope that looked like it had been sealed decades ago. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind they don't make anymore. Written across the front in Grandpa's familiar handwriting were words that made my heart skip. "For Reginald only, to be read aloud after main distribution. All family must be present." Your grandfather left very specific instructions about this envelope. Patterson explained, his lawyer's composure cracking slightly. It was only to be opened after the main will had been read, and only if all family members were present. Derek shifted uncomfortably. "What kind of instructions? Why the secrecy?" Dad leaned forward, his business instincts kicking in. "What's in the envelope, Patterson?" "I honestly don't know," why Patterson replied, which surprised everyone. "Your grandfather sealed it himself and gave it to me with explicit instructions. I was not to open it or examine its contents beforehand." The envelope sat on Patterson's desk like a bomb waiting to explode. After 30 minutes of being treated like an afterthought, suddenly all eyes were on me. For the first time in my life, I had something Derek wanted to know about. The atmosphere in the room shifted, like the air pressure before a storm. Derek's confident demeanor flickered, replaced by something I'd rarely seen in my golden brother: uncertainty. Dad's businessman mask slipped, revealing the control freak underneath who hated not knowing every detail of any situation involving family money. Patterson's paralegal, Sandra Martinez, entered the room carrying additional files from the back office. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-30s who'd worked for the firm for over a decade. I'd noticed her taking notes throughout the will, reading her expression growing more curious as the meeting progressed. Mr. Patterson, Sandra said quietly, I've located the additional documents your grandfather requested we keep in the vault. Patterson nodded and turned back to the envelope, studying Grandpa's handwriting, as if searching for clues. The paper was cream-colored with age, sealed with red wax that bore Grandpa's signet ring impression. Even from across the desk, I could see that whatever was inside was substantial. The envelope was thick, bulging with multiple pages. I don't understand why there would be secret instructions, Derek said, his voice tight with anxiety. Grandpa never kept secrets from the family. If I hadn't been so nervous myself, I might have laughed at that statement. Derek had no idea how many secrets our family kept from each other. But this was different. This felt important in a way that made my hands shake. Mom set down her phone, her socialite mask cracking to reveal genuine concern. Robert, did your father ever mention anything about a special message for Reginald? Dad shook his head, but I caught something in his expression. A flicker of memory, perhaps, or recognition. He mentioned wanting to make sure Reginald understood his place in the family legacy. I assumed he meant the tools and equipment. Patterson carefully broke the wax seal, the dry crack echoing in the silent room. Inside the envelope were several folded documents, what appeared to be photographs, and a handwritten letter on Grandpa's personal stationery. As Patterson unfolded the letter, his eyebrows rose, and his face went pale. Perhaps I should read this privately first, he suggested, but Derek immediately objected. No way. The instructions said to read it with everyone present. That means all of us hear it at the same time. Patterson looked uncomfortable, scanning the first few lines of the letter. His expression shifted from confusion to concern to something approaching shock. Sandra leaned closer, reading over his shoulder, and I saw her eyes widen. Very well, Patterson said, his professional composure clearly strained. But I want everyone to understand that I'm simply following your grandfather's explicit instructions. The contents of this letter were unknown to me until this moment. He cleared his throat and began reading in Grandpa's words. My dearest Reginald, if you are hearing this letter, then I am gone, and my plan is finally in motion. I need to start by apologizing to you, my boy, for what you've endured over the years. I've watched your family overlook you, dismiss you, and treat you as less than you are, and it has broken my heart every single day. The room was dead silent except for the rain against the windows. Derek's face had gone rigid, and I could see a vein pulsing in Dad's temple. Patterson continued, You may have wondered how you received that full scholarship to Texas Technical College for your construction management degree. The scholarship that covered not just tuition, but also your living expenses for 2 years, the one that came from an anonymous donor. My heart stopped. I had wondered about that scholarship. It had appeared out of nowhere during my senior year of high school, when my grades were good, but not exceptional. And when my family had made it clear that Derek's Harvard education was the priority. That was me, Reginald. I couldn't bear to see you give up on your education because your parents decided Derek deserved the family's financial support. I set up a scholarship fund specifically for you, channeled through the college's financial aid office, so you'd never know it came from family money. Mom gasped audibly. Dad's face had turned red, whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. What? But that's not the only secret I've kept to protect you, Patterson read on. Over the past 5 years, I hired a private investigator to document certain family members' activities. What Detective Frank Miller discovered would shock you. Patterson paused, looking at additional documents in the envelope. Sandra handed him a folder she'd retrieved from the vault, and his expression grew even more troubled. Derek, Patterson continued reading. I know about the cocaine. I know about the money you've been stealing from your clients' accounts at Blackstone Investments. I know about your gambling debts in Atlantic City. And I know about the $200,000 your father unknowingly paid to cover your embezzlement when your firm's audit came too close to exposing you. Derek shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. That's impossible. That's all lies. Grandpa would never spy on family. Sit down, Derek, Dad commanded, but his voice lacked its usual authority. He looked like a man watching his world crumble in real time. Patterson pulled out a manila folder containing photographs and documents. Your grandfather was very thorough. These photos show Derek meeting with known drug dealers in downtown Houston. These bank records show systematic withdrawals from client accounts at Blackstone Investments, always in amounts just small enough to avoid triggering automatic audits. The photographs were clear and damning. Derek in parking garages, exchanging envelopes with unsavory characters. Derek at casinos, throwing around money he shouldn't have had. Derek in the Blackstone offices, after hours accessing computers and files he had no business touching. This is insane, Derek protested, but sweat was beading on his forehead. Someone doctored those photos. Someone setting me up. Patterson returned to the letter. But the worst revelation was yet to come. During his investigation, Detective Miller uncovered medical records DNA test results and documented evidence that Derek is not Robert's biological son. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's face went white as paper, and she gripped the arms of her chair like she was afraid of falling. Dad stared at Patterson as if the lawyer had just spoken in a foreign language. According to the DNA test conducted 18 months ago, Patterson continued, Derek's biological father is Thomas Blackwood Roberts' former business partner and Patricia's secret lover from 29 years ago. The envelope contained copies of medical records from a private clinic DNA test results from 3 separate laboratories and a timeline that matched Derek's conception to Patricia's affair with Thomas Blackwood, the man who had been Dad's closest friend and business partner until their mysterious falling out when Derek was 2 years old. Mom began crying silently, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. Dad sat frozen, his mind clearly reeling as 30 years of memories were recontextualized in light of this revelation. Derek's denial became more frantic. This is all fabricated. Grandpa was losing his mind at the end. You can't believe any of this. But I was starting to piece things together. The sudden end of Dad's partnership with Thomas Blackwood when Derek was a toddler. The way Mom always got nervous when Thomas's name came up in conversation. The way Derek had always looked slightly different from the rest of us, sharing features with neither parent. Patterson pulled out another set of documents. Your grandfather's letter continues. Thomas Blackwood has been blackmailing the family for 27 years, demanding regular payments to keep Derek's true parentage secret. Derek discovered the truth about his parentage 5 years ago and has been working with Blackwood to systematically drain the family's assets through escalating blackmail demands. The final bombshell hit like a physical blow. Derek hadn't just been stealing from his clients. He'd been collaborating with his biological father to extort money from the man who'd raised him, the man who'd given him every advantage in life. Sandra handed Patterson one more document, and his expression darkened further as he read ahead. There's more, he said quietly. Thomas Blackwood died in a car accident 6 months ago, but not before he made a deathbed confession to your grandfather revealing the full scope of Derek's involvement in the blackmail scheme. The room felt like it was spinning. Everything I'd believed about my family, about Derek's success, about my own place in the hierarchy, was crashing down around us. But Grandpa's letter wasn't finished, and something in Patterson's expression told me the biggest revelations were yet to come. The deathbed confession Thomas Blackwood made to Grandpa was contained in a separate sealed letter within the envelope, along with a statement he'd given to Detective Frank Miller just weeks before his fatal accident. Patterson's hands shook slightly as he unfolded Blackwood's final testimony. According to Thomas Blackwood's confession, Patterson read, the blackmail scheme began small, just $5,000 every few months to help with Derek's expensive private school tuition. But as Derek got older and more sophisticated, the demands escalated. Detective Frank Miller had been thorough in documenting everything. The envelope contained credit card statements showing payments to expensive hotels where Derek met with Blackwood. There were bank records showing wire transfers from Robert's business accounts to shell companies controlled by Blackwood. Most damning of all were recorded phone conversations between Derek and Blackwood planning their next financial extraction from the family. Derek's composure finally cracked completely. "You have to understand, I never meant for it to go this far. Thomas told me I deserved more than what Robert was giving me. He said it was owed to me. Owed to you." Dad's voice was barely controlled fury. "I gave you everything. Harvard, the job, connections, the down payment on your condo, the BMW, the country club membership. What more could you possibly have wanted?" "You gave me what you thought a son should have," Derek shot back. "But I wasn't your son, was I? I was living a lie every single day, pretending to be grateful for handouts from a man who wasn't even my father." Mom finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Derek, honey, we never told you because we wanted to protect you. We wanted you to have a stable family life. Protect me." Derek's laugh was bitter and sharp. "You protected yourselves. You were terrified that Robert would throw us both out if he learned the truth. So you built your perfect lie and expected me to live in it forever." The photographs in the envelope told a story that spanned decades. There were pictures of Mom and Thomas Blackwood from 30 years ago, stolen moments in restaurant booths, embracing in parking lots, looking at each other with the kind of passion I'd never seen between my parents. There were hotel receipts, love letters, and medical records from a private clinic where Mom had taken prenatal paternity tests. Detective Miller's investigation had uncovered a complex web of deception that went far beyond simple adultery. Thomas Blackwood had been systematically gathering evidence of the affair for years, photographing private moments, and collecting documentation that would allow him to control the family indefinitely. "Your grandfather's letter explains his strategy." Patterson continued reading. "He says I couldn't expose the truth without destroying the family, but I also couldn't stand by and watch Reginald suffer while Derek was rewarded for living a lie. So I devised a plan that would reveal everything at the right moment while protecting the innocent and ensuring justice for the guilty." Sandra produced another folder from the vault, this one, containing financial documents that made everyone's jaw drop. The inheritance Derek had just received, the Connecticut house, the Martha's Vineyard property, the stock portfolio, the classic cars, and the liquid assets existed only on paper. The Connecticut mansion, Patterson read from an appraisal report, currently has a $5 million mortgage that Derek secretly obtained 2 years ago using forged documents and his position as Robert's heir apparent. Dad's face went from red to purple. "You mortgaged my father's house without permission? How is that even possible?" Derek couldn't meet his eyes. "I needed the money. The blackmail payments were getting bigger, and my clients were starting to ask questions about their accounts. I thought I could pay it back before anyone noticed." "The Martha's Vineyard house was sold 18 months ago," Patterson continued. "Derek used his power of attorney, granted to him by his grandfather for emergency medical decisions, to liquidate the property without the family's knowledge. The classic car collection had been sold piece by piece over the past 3 years. The stock portfolio had been systematically emptied to cover Derek's gambling debts and drug payments. The $16 million in liquid assets had been reduced to less than $400,000, most of which was already earmarked to cover pending lawsuits from Derek's investment clients. So Derek's $36 million inheritance," I said slowly, the reality sinking in, "is actually negative several million dollars once you account for the debts, lawsuits, and missing assets." "Precisely," Patterson confirmed. "Your grandfather knew this when he wrote the will. He deliberately structured Derek's inheritance to include assets that Derek had already stolen or compromised. It was designed to expose the full scope of his crimes. Mom was sobbing openly now, her carefully constructed socialite facade completely shattered. Thomas promised me he would never hurt Derek. He said the money was just temporary help, that he was investing it for Derek's future. Thomas Blackwood was a con man. Detective Miller's report stated he used his relationship with Derek to gain access to family financial information, real estate documents, and investment account details. His death was investigated as a possible suicide when investigators discovered he was facing federal charges for running multiple inheritance fraud schemes targeting wealthy families across Texas. The room felt like a crime scene, with evidence of 30 years of deception scattered across Patterson's desk. Derek slumped in his chair, finally understanding that his golden life was built on a foundation of lies and theft. Dad stared at the DNA test results, probably wondering how many other signs he'd missed over the years. But Grandpa's letter had one more revelation that would change everything we thought we knew about our family. There's something else. Patterson said, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to reveal. Your grandfather writes, I must confess my own secret, one that I've carried for 25 years. Patricia's affair with Thomas Blackwood was not the only infidelity in this family. The letter revealed that 25 years ago, shortly after Derek's birth, Dad had his own affair with Eleanor Whitney, Grandpa's secretary and business partner. Eleanor had been helping Grandpa manage his real estate investments for decades, and she and Dad had grown close during a time when his marriage was strained by Patricia's guilt and Thomas Blackwood's increasing blackmail demands. Eleanor Whitney, Patterson continued, has been protecting this family's interests for 25 years, not just as an employee, but as someone who genuinely cares about Robert and has been working behind the scenes to minimize the damage from Derek's destructive choices. Sandra opened the office door, and a distinguished woman in her early 70s entered the room. Eleanor Whitney was elegant and sharp-eyed, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and an expression that suggested she'd been expecting this moment for years. Hello, Robert, Eleanor said quietly, her voice carrying decades of unspoken history. I'm sorry you had to learn about everything this way, but your father insisted it was the only way to stop Derek before he destroyed what was left of your family's legacy. Dad looked at Eleanor with a mixture of recognition, regret, and something that might have been relief. After 30 years of living with Patricia's lies, here was a woman who knew all his secrets and had chosen to protect rather than exploit them. Derek stared at Eleanor with growing panic. You've been spying on me. You're the one who told Grandpa everything. I've been trying to save you from yourself, Eleanor replied calmly. Your grandfather and I spent years hoping you'd change direction before it was too late. But when you started forging Robert's signature on loan documents and using your insider knowledge to steal from your clients, we realized intervention was necessary. The final documents in the envelope were FBI case files. Eleanor had been working with federal investigators for over a year, providing evidence of Derek's financial crimes, while Grandpa documented the family's long history of secrets and lies. Derek, Patterson said, reading from an official document, you're going to be arrested within the hour. Federal agents are waiting outside this office with warrants for your arrest on charges of embezzlement, fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. As if on cue, Sandra knocked on the door and announced that Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division had arrived and was requesting immediate access to the conference room. The golden boy who had everything was about to lose it all, while the family secrets that had shaped our lives for 30 years were finally coming to light. But as devastating as these revelations were, I was beginning to understand that Grandpa's real plan was just getting started. Agent Sarah Collins entered the room with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent years building cases against white-collar criminals. She was a compact woman in her late 30s with steel-gray eyes and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd seen every trick in the book. 2 additional agents flanked her, their presence turning Patterson's elegant office into a federal crime scene. Derek Hartwell. Agent Collins said, producing a badge and warrant, "You're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." Derek looked around the room desperately, as if expecting someone to rescue him. "This is insane. You can't just barge in here and arrest me based on some delusional letters from my dead grandfather." "Actually," Agent Collins replied, pulling out a thick file, "we can. Your grandfather has been cooperating with our investigation for 14 months. We have recorded conversations, documented financial transfers, and testimony from multiple witnesses regarding your systematic theft from Blackstone Investments client accounts." The evidence was overwhelming. Grandpa had secretly recorded phone calls with Derek where he confessed to stealing client money. There were security camera footage from Derek's late-night visits to the Blackstone offices accessing accounts he wasn't authorized to touch. Most damning of all were the wire transfer records showing Derek moving stolen funds through a network of offshore accounts controlled by Thomas Blackwood. The total theft amount, Agent Collins continued, is $1.2 million stolen from 17 different client accounts over a 3-year period. Your firm has already filed civil suits against you for the full amount plus damages. As federal agents read Derek his rights and placed him in handcuffs, Eleanor Whitney stepped forward with yet another folder that would transform my understanding of everything. "Reginald," Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm, "your grandfather wanted you to understand the full scope of what he's done for you. The workshop tools and equipment were just the beginning." She opened the folder to reveal property deeds, business incorporation papers, and bank account statements that made my head spin. Grandpa hadn't just left me as tools. He'd been secretly building an empire in my name for over a decade. Hartwell Construction Company was incorporated 12 years ago, Eleanor explained. "With you listed as the primary owner, your grandfather funded the company's growth through shell corporations and investment partnerships that I managed on his behalf. The documents showed that Hartwell Construction owned 17 commercial properties across Houston, Dallas, and Austin. The company had completed major projects including 3 shopping centers, 2 office buildings, and a residential development that I'd actually worked on as a subcontractor without knowing I owned the general contracting company." "The penthouse apartment overlooking Buffalo Bayou," Eleanor continued, "has been in your name for 8 years. Your grandfather purchased it as an investment property, but the deed has always listed you as the owner." I stared at the address on the deed, a luxury high-rise I'd driven past countless times, dreaming about what it would be like to live somewhere with a view of the city skyline. According to the documents, I'd owned the 3-bedroom penthouse since I was 20. "But that's not all," Eleanor said, producing bank statements from Swiss accounts I'd never heard of. "Your grandfather has been depositing money into investment accounts in your name for 15 years. The current balance across all accounts is $44,700,000. The room went silent except for the sound of Derek struggling against his handcuffs as agents prepared to escort him out. Mom stared at the bank statements like they were written in a foreign language. Dad's expression had shifted from shock to something approaching awe. "How is this possible?" I managed to ask. "I never signed any incorporation papers. I never opened any Swiss bank accounts." "Your grandfather had legal power of attorney for your finances until your 21st birthday," Eleanor explained. "He established everything legally with the intention of transferring full control to you when you were mature enough to handle the responsibility." Patterson produced additional documents showing that Grandpa had been far wealthier than anyone in the family realized. While Derek was getting the visible family assets, the houses and cars that impressed people at country club parties, Grandpa was quietly building a business empire that generated millions in annual revenue. "Your grandfather owned significant stakes in 3 technology companies that went public over the past decade," Eleanor continued. He also invested heavily in Houston real estate during the recovery period after the 2008 crisis. The properties he acquired then are now worth 10 times their original purchase price. The genius of Grandpa's plan was becoming clear. While everyone in the family focused on Derek's inheritance of traditional wealth symbols, Grandpa had been creating real productive assets that would continue generating income for decades. Hartwell Construction currently employs 67 people across 3 cities, Eleanor said. The company has contracts worth $32 million scheduled over the next 2 years, focusing on affordable housing projects and commercial developments. As Derek was led away in handcuffs, he shouted over his shoulder, "This isn't over, Reginald. That money should have been mine. I'm the one who understood the family business." Agent Collins paused at the door. "Actually, Derek, your crimes have generated quite a bit of additional investigation. We've identified at least 12 other families who were targeted by Thomas Blackwood's inheritance fraud schemes. Your cooperation in those cases might reduce your sentence from 20 years to 15. The door closed behind the federal agents, leaving our devastated family alone with the wreckage of 30 years of lies. But Eleanor wasn't finished revealing the scope of Grandpa's preparations. "There's one more thing," she said, producing a video recording device. "Your grandfather recorded several messages specifically for this moment. He wanted you to understand not just what he was giving you, but why he chose you over Derek." The video showed Grandpa in his study looking directly into the camera with the clear eyes and gentle smile I remembered from childhood. Seeing him again even in a recording brought tears to my eyes. "Reginald, my boy?" Grandpa's voice filled the room. "If you're watching this, then my plan has worked, and the truth is finally out. I need you to understand that everything I did was because I saw in you the kind of man I wanted to be when I was your age." The recording revealed that Grandpa had been watching our family dynamics for years, documenting not just Derek's crimes, but also my character. He'd secretly filmed me returning a wallet I found at a construction site containing $800 cash that I turned in to the police instead of keeping. He'd recorded conversations where I defended coworkers against unfair treatment, even when it cost me promotions. At Gate, Derek learned to take things that didn't belong to him, Grandpa said in the video. "But you, Reginald, you learned to build things and give them away. You learned to create value rather than extract it. That's why you're getting the real inheritance, because I trust you to use it to help people rather than just help yourself." Eleanor handed me keys to the penthouse along with business documents that would transfer full control of Hartwell Construction to me immediately. After 28 years of feeling like the family failure, I was learning that the man whose opinion mattered most had been preparing me for success all along. But the day's revelations weren't over yet. There was still one more family secret that would reshape everything I thought I knew about my place in the family tree. As the federal agents processed Derek's arrest in the hallway outside Patterson's office, Eleanor Whitney revealed the final piece of Grandpa's elaborate puzzle. She produced a leather-bound journal that had been locked in the law firm's private vault for over 20 years. "Your grandfather kept detailed records of everything," Eleanor explained, opening the journal to pages filled with Grandpa's meticulous handwriting. "Not just Derek's crimes and your parents' affairs, but also the steps he took to protect you from the fallout of your family's dysfunction." The journal entries painted a picture of a man who'd spent decades carefully documenting and quietly correcting his family's mistakes. When Derek started showing signs of addiction in high school, Grandpa had secretly paid for 3 different rehabilitation programs, all of which Derek had abandoned. When Derek's gambling debts threatened to expose his drug use, Grandpa had covered the payments while hiring Detective Miller to gather evidence of the illegal activity. "Now, but the most important entry," Eleanor said, turning to a page dated 5 years ago, "is when your grandfather discovered the truth about your parents' relationship and Derek's real parentage." According to the journal, Grandpa had suspected the truth about Derek for years, but chose to protect the family secret rather than destroy Robert's marriage and Derek's sense of identity. However, when Derek began stealing from his investment clients and collaborating with Thomas Blackwood in increasingly sophisticated blackmail schemes, Grandpa realized that protecting Derek was enabling him to hurt innocent people. Agent Collins returned to the office as Eleanor was explaining Grandpa's decision-making process. "I wanted to update you on Derek's situation," the agent said. "He's agreed to cooperate with our investigation into Thomas Blackwood's other victims. We've identified at least 3 more families in Texas who lost significant money to similar inheritance fraud schemes." The scope of Blackwood and Derek's criminal enterprise was staggering. They had targeted wealthy families with complex inheritance situations, using Derek's insider knowledge of estate planning and Blackwood's connections in private investigation firms to identify vulnerable targets. Derek's cooperation might reduce his sentence, Agent Collins continued, but he's still looking at 8 to 12 years in federal prison. The money he stole from client accounts will be recovered through asset forfeiture, but the civil lawsuits from his victims will likely bankrupt him completely. As Agent Collins left, Eleanor opened another section of Grandpa's journal that contained the most shocking revelation yet. 25 years ago, when Dad was struggling with Patricia's affair and Derek's questionable parentage, he had turned to Eleanor for emotional support. Their relationship had developed into something deeper. But unlike Patricia's destructive affair with Thomas Blackwood Dad, and Eleanor's connection had been based on genuine respect and shared values. "Your father ended our relationship," Eleanor explained to me quietly, "because he felt obligated to stay married to Patricia for Derek's sake. But your grandfather knew that Eleanor was the woman Robert truly loved, and he'd been hoping they would find their way back to each other once the truth about Derek came out." The journal revealed that Eleanor had been protecting our family's interests for 25 years, partly out of professional loyalty to Grandpa, but also out of love for Dad. She'd helped cover Derek's early mistakes, managed the complex shell corporations that protected Grandpa's real wealth, and provided emotional support to Dad during his most difficult periods. "Robert," Eleanor said, addressing my father directly for the first time since the arrests, "your father wanted you to know that some secrets are worth keeping and some are worth revealing. He hoped that once the truth was out, you'd be free to make choices based on love rather than obligation." Dad looked at Eleanor with an expression I'd never seen before. Vulnerability mixed with hope. After 30 years of marriage built on lies and financial arrangements, here was a woman who knew his worst secrets and still chose to stand by him. Mom, meanwhile, was falling apart completely. The revelation that Derek was facing federal prison time, combined with the exposure of her decades-old affair, had shattered her carefully constructed identity as the perfect socialite wife and mother. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she sobbed. "Thomas convinced me that the blackmail payments were just temporary, that he was helping Derek get established in his career. I thought if I could just keep the secret long enough, everything would work out." "The problem," Eleanor said gently but firmly, "is that Derek learned from your example that lying and taking shortcuts were acceptable ways to get what he wanted. He grew up watching his parents live with deception, so he never learned the value of honest work or genuine achievement. Patterson had been quietly organizing all the legal documents throughout this family crisis. Now he presented me with a folder containing everything I needed to take control of my inheritance business licenses, property deeds, bank account access codes, and power of attorney documents that would make me the legal owner of assets worth over $60 million. Your grandfather's final instruction," Patterson said, "was that you should use this wealth to build something meaningful. He didn't want you to simply inherit money. He wanted you to inherit the responsibility of creating value for other people." The penthouse apartment alone was worth over $2 million, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Houston and Buffalo Bayou. The construction company I now owned had projects scheduled that would provide steady employment for dozens of workers while creating affordable housing for families who'd been priced out of the city's gentrified neighborhoods. But as overwhelming as the financial inheritance was, the most important revelation was still to come. Eleanor produced one final document from Grandpa's journal, a letter he'd written to me just weeks before his death. "My dear Reginald," Patterson read aloud, "I need you to understand that this inheritance comes with a choice. You can use this wealth to become the kind of man your family always wanted you to be. Impressive, powerful, dominant over others. Or you can use it to become the kind of man I know you already are. Generous, hardworking, and committed to helping others build better lives." The letter explained that Grandpa had chosen me not despite my struggles with being overlooked and undervalued, but because of how I'd responded to those challenges with dignity and kindness rather than bitterness and revenge. Derek learned to take what he wanted through charm and manipulation. The letter continued, "But you learned to earn what you needed through honest work and treating people fairly. That's why I'm trusting you with the real family legacy, because I know you'll use it to create opportunities for others rather than just advantages for yourself." As the day's revelations settled around us, I realized that Grandpa's true gift wasn't the money or the properties or even the business empire. His real gift was showing me that my worth had never depended on my family's recognition or Derek's failures. I had value because of who I chose to be, not because of what I inherited. The golden boy who had seemed to have everything was now facing federal prison time and financial ruin. The family secrets that had poisoned our relationships for decades were finally exposed, and the grandson who had been treated as an afterthought was learning that the person whose opinion mattered most had been preparing him for this moment all along. But the transformation was just beginning. The real test would be what I chose to do with this unexpected power and responsibility. 3 months after Derek's arrest, our family had settled into a new reality that none of us could have imagined. Derek pled guilty to federal financial crimes in exchange for a reduced sentence, ultimately receiving 12 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 8. His investment firm license was permanently revoked, and his personal assets were liquidated to pay restitution to the clients he'd robbed. The legal proceedings revealed the full scope of Derek's criminal enterprise. He'd stolen a total of $1.4 million from client accounts money that had been funneled through Thomas Blackwood's network to pay for Derek's drug addiction, gambling debts, and lavish lifestyle. The civil lawsuits from his victims would follow him for decades, ensuring that any money he earned after prison would go toward paying back the people he'd hurt. Judge Margaret Stone, who presided over Derek's sentencing hearing, made it clear that she viewed his crimes as particularly heinous because they'd been committed against people who trusted him with their life savings. "Mr. Hartwell," she said during sentencing, "you didn't just steal money, you stole people's retirement security, their children's college funds, and their peace of mind." Derek's downfall had ripple effects throughout our family. Mom and Dad's marriage couldn't survive the weight of 30 years of mutual deception. They handled their divorce with surprising maturity, both finally admitting that they'd stayed together out of obligation rather than love. Patricia moved to California to stay with her sister and start over, while Robert began seeing a therapist to address his decades of emotional neglect and favoritism. "I don't expect forgiveness," Dad told me during one of our first honest conversations in years. "I spent your entire childhood treating you like you were less important than Derek, and I can't undo that damage. But I want you to know that your grandfather was right about your character. You became a good man despite my failures as a father, not because of anything I taught you." Eleanor Whitney became my guide into the complex world of managing significant wealth and business operations. The construction company I now owned was more sophisticated than I'd realized, with multiple crews working on projects across 3 cities. Eleanor had been overseeing operations for years, ensuring that Hartwell Construction maintained high safety standards, fair labor practices, and a reputation for quality work. Your grandfather wanted you to understand that real wealth comes from creating value for other people, Eleanor explained as we toured one of our affordable housing developments. These apartments will provide homes for families who couldn't otherwise afford to live in decent neighborhoods. That's worth more than any amount sitting in a bank account. The transformation of my daily life was surreal. I moved into the penthouse apartment that had legally been mine for 8 years, trading my cramped one-bedroom unit for 3,000 square feet of luxury, overlooking the city where I'd grown up feeling worthless. But rather than becoming isolated by wealth, I found myself more connected to my community than ever before. Hartwell Construction's current projects included 6 affordable housing developments, 2 community centers, and a vocational training facility where young people could learn construction trades. I instituted a policy that 20% of our workforce had to be apprentices and recent graduates from technical programs providing entry-level opportunities in an industry where getting started could be difficult. The scholarship fund Grandpa had secretly created for my education became the foundation for a larger program supporting community college students from working-class families. We provided not just tuition assistance, but also tools work boots and paid internships that gave students practical experience while they completed their education. 6 months after inheriting Grandpa's empire, I received my first letter from Derek in federal prison. His tone was different from the arrogant golden boy I'd grown up with, humbled, reflective, and genuinely remorseful. Reginald, he wrote, I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I wanted you to know that I'm finally getting clean. Prison forced me to face my addiction and the choices I made. I'm working on my GED and taking business classes because I want to do something legitimate when I get out. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you know that I'm ashamed of how I treated you and what I did to our family. Derek's letter revealed that he was participating in addiction recovery programs and had become a mentor to younger inmates who were struggling with similar issues. He wasn't asking for money or special treatment, just acknowledgement that he was trying to become a better person. Patricia also reached out from California, where she was working as a volunteer counselor for women escaping abusive relationships. I spent 30 years living with secrets and lies, she wrote, and I see now how that poison infected our entire family. You deserved better parents, Reginald. You deserved to know that you were valued and loved for exactly who you were. The most meaningful change was in my relationship with Dad. Without the competition between Derek and me, and without the secrets that had warped our family dynamics for decades, Robert began showing genuine interest in my work and my values. He started visiting construction sites not to criticize or interfere, but to understand the kind of impact I was trying to create. Your grandfather always said that real success meant leaving the world better than you found it, Dad told me as we watched a crew installing solar panels on a community center we'd built. I got so focused on accumulating wealth that I forgot why accumulation mattered, but you understand the purpose behind the power. Eleanor and Dad's relationship was developing slowly, both of them cautious, after decades of separation, but clearly still caring deeply for each other. They attended community events together, worked on charitable projects, and seemed to be building something genuine based on shared values, rather than financial convenience or social obligations. The most rewarding aspect of my new life was seeing the direct impact of ethical business practices. Hartwell Construction paid above-market wages, provided comprehensive health insurance for all employees, and maintained safety standards that exceeded industry requirements. Our projects created not just buildings, but opportunities for workers to build careers and support their families with dignity. A year after Grandpa's death, I stood in his old workshop, now converted into a training facility where young apprentices learned to use the tools that had been my original inheritance. The $2,000 bequest that had seemed like an afterthought was now helping dozens of people gain skills that would support them for decades. Tommy Rodriguez, a 16-year-old scholarship recipient from East Houston, was learning to frame walls under the guidance of Marcus Washington, a master carpenter who'd been with our company for 15 years. Tommy's enthusiasm reminded me of my own excitement when Grandpa first taught me to use a level and square. "Mr. Hartwell," Tommy said as I watched him measure and cut lumber, "my counselor told me you started out working construction just like us. Is that really true?" "It is," I replied. And the most important thing I learned wasn't how to read blueprints or operate equipment. I learned that the work you do with your hands can change people's lives, including your own. Eleanor found me in the workshop that afternoon carrying a final envelope from Grandpa's personal papers. "He wanted you to have this on the first anniversary of the will reading," she said. Inside was a photograph of Grandpa and me from when I was 12 years old, both of us covered in sawdust after building a treehouse in his backyard. On the back he'd written, "Reginald, you had the right hands and the right heart from the beginning. I just wanted to give you the right tools. Build something beautiful. Love, Grandpa." Attached to the photo was a final letter. "If you're reading this, then you've successfully taken control of your inheritance and begun building something meaningful with it. The money and properties were never the real gift. They were just resources to help you create the kind of impact I knew you were capable of. The real inheritance was your character, your work ethic, and your natural inclination to help others. That came from you, not from me." As I held that letter in the workshop where everything had started, I finally understood Grandpa's true lesson. Real inheritance isn't about money passing from one generation to the next. It's about values, character, and the choice to use whatever resources you have, whether it's $2,000 in tools or $60 million in assets, to create opportunities for other people to build better lives. Derek had learned to take what he wanted through charm and manipulation, but I'd learned to earn what I needed through honest work and treating people fairly. That difference in character, not the difference in our inheritance, would determine our ultimate legacy. 2 years after that life-changing day in Patterson's law office, I stood on the balcony of the penthouse that had been mine all along, watching the sun rise over a city where I was finally home. Houston stretched out below me, full of opportunities to build, create, and contribute rather than simply consume and accumulate. Hartwell Construction had grown into one of the region's most respected firms, not because we were the biggest or most profitable, but because we'd proven that ethical business practices and social responsibility could coexist with financial success. Our workforce had expanded to 97 employees across 4 cities, and our reputation for quality work and fair treatment attracted both skilled craftsmen and clients who valued integrity. The affordable housing projects we'd completed provided homes for over 300 families, while our community centers offered after-school programs, job training, and meeting spaces for neighborhood organizations. The vocational training facility had graduated 2 classes of apprentices with employment rates exceeding 90%, as local contractors competed to hire workers trained in our program. Tommy Rodriguez, now 18, had become our youngest crew leader after demonstrating both technical skills and natural leadership ability. He was attending community college part-time while working full-time, following the same path I'd taken, but with better support and clearer opportunities for advancement. "Mr. Hartwell," Tommy said as we reviewed plans for our newest affordable housing development, "I wanted you to know that my little sister Maria is applying for the scholarship program next year. She wants to study architecture so she can design buildings like the ones we're constructing." Stories like Tommy's reminded me daily why Grandpa's inheritance had come with such specific expectations. The scholarship program had helped 47 students attend community college or technical schools, providing not just tuition assistance but mentorship, internships, and career guidance that helped them transition from education to meaningful employment. Dad had become my most reliable advisor, bringing his decades of real estate experience to our projects while learning to appreciate the social impact component that drove our business model. His relationship with Eleanor had developed into a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared commitment to using their resources constructively. "Your grandfather would be proud of what you've built," Dad told me, as we visited a completed community center where dozens of children were participating in after-school programs. He always believed that wealth should create opportunities for others, not just comfort for the wealthy. The most meaningful validation came from unexpected sources. Derek wrote from prison every few months, sharing updates on his rehabilitation and expressing genuine pride in what I'd accomplished with our grandfather's inheritance. His letters showed a maturity and humility that had been completely absent during our childhood. "I spent 30 years trying to prove I deserved more than everyone else," Derek wrote in his most recent letter. "But you spent those same 30 years proving that everyone else deserved more than they were getting." Grandpa saw that difference in our characters, and he made the right choice. Derek's prison sentence had been reduced to 10 years for his cooperation with federal investigators, and he'd earned his GED, along with certificates in addiction counseling and small business management. He wasn't asking for help or special treatment when he was released, just acknowledgement that he was working to become someone worthy of a second chance. Patricia had found her calling in California working with women's shelters and domestic violence prevention programs. She'd earned a certification in family counseling and was using her experience with secrets and deception to help other families address their dysfunction before it destroyed their relationships. "I can't undo the damage I caused by choosing silence over honesty," she wrote. "But I can help other mothers understand that protecting children from the truth often hurts them more than sharing age-appropriate reality. You deserve to know that you were valued and loved regardless of Derek's achievements or my failures." Eleanor had become more than a business advisor. She was the grandmother figure I'd never had, combining Grandpa's wisdom with practical expertise in managing complex financial and legal situations. Her relationship with Dad was deepening gradually, both of them taking time to build something genuine after decades of separation. The penthouse apartment had been transformed into more than just a luxury residence. I used the main living areas to host community meetings, scholarship award ceremonies, and strategy sessions for local affordable housing initiatives. The space that could have isolated me from the community instead became a gathering place where construction workers, community activists, and business leaders collaborated on projects that benefited everyone. Judge Margaret Stone, who had sentenced Derek, reached out to commend our company's role in providing employment opportunities for people transitioning from incarceration. Several of our workers were former inmates who'd completed our vocational training program, proving that second chances combined with practical skills could break cycles of recidivism. The financial impact of ethical business practices was surprisingly positive. Companies and organizations that valued social responsibility sought us out specifically because of our reputation for fair labor practices and community investment. Our profit margins were healthy, our employee retention rate was exceptional, and our waiting list for new projects extended over 18 months. Most importantly, I'd learned to measure success differently than my family had taught me. Instead of counting accumulation, I counted contribution. Instead of competing with others for recognition, I focused on creating opportunities for others to succeed. Instead of trying to prove my worth through external validation, I found satisfaction in work that aligned with my values. On the second anniversary of Grandpa's death, I visited his grave with a photo album documenting everything that had grown from his inheritance. The images showed completed housing developments, graduation ceremonies for scholarship recipients, ribbon cuttings for community centers, and dozens of workers who'd built careers through our apprenticeship programs. "Thank you for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself," I said, placing the album next to his headstone. "And thank you for teaching me that the best inheritance isn't what we receive, but what we choose to give." Standing there in the cemetery where my grandfather rested, I understood his final and most important lesson. Real legacy isn't about accumulating wealth or achieving recognition. It's about using whatever resources and opportunities you have to create possibilities for other people to build meaningful lives. Derek had learned to take what he wanted through charm and manipulation, but I'd learned to earn what I needed through honest work and genuine service to others. That difference in approach, more than any difference in inheritance, would determine our lasting impact on the world. The workshop tools that had seemed like such a modest bequest were now helping dozens of young people gain skills that would support them for decades. The construction company I'd unknowingly owned was providing stable employment while creating affordable housing for families who needed opportunities rather than charity. The real inheritance my grandfather had given me wasn't money or property. It was the understanding that everyone deserves to know their true value regardless of how their family sees them. By choosing to invest in others, rather than simply accumulating for myself, I was passing on the most important lesson he'd taught me: that worth comes from what we build together, not what we own alone. 2 years after learning I was worth $60 million, I discovered something far more valuable: the satisfaction of using resources to create opportunities, of building wealth that builds communities, and of inheriting not just assets, but the responsibility to help others achieve their potential. Tommy Rodriguez was saving money to buy his first house. Maria would start her architecture program with full scholarship support. Dozens of families were living in affordable homes that provided stability and hope. And somewhere in federal prison, Derek was learning the same lesson that had taken me 28 years to understand: that real success comes from contributing to something bigger than yourself. That I realized was my grandfather's true masterpiece, not the business empire he'd built, but the values he'd passed on, and the opportunities those values created for everyone whose lives intersected with our family's story. Have you ever felt overlooked or undervalued by your family, only to discover later that someone was quietly believing in you all along? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about how we can recognize and nurture potential in others, even when they can't see it themselves. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more inspiring stories about family justice and second chances, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth doesn't depend on others' recognition. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the most powerful inheritance isn't what we receive, but what we choose to give to others.